Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today, I'm honored and humbled to be in the virtual presence of a man who needs no introduction, Jeffery Deaver. But it would be rude not to say at least a few words about him, so how about I start with these? He is the #1 internationally best-selling author of more than 40 novels and 3 collections of short stories. The numbers speak for themselves. 50 million books sold in 150 countries and translated into more than 25 languages. In addition to numerous accolades, look him up, he has been decorated with Lifetime Achievement Awards from BoucherCon and The Strand magazine, and is also a recipient of the Raymond Chandler Lifetime Achievement Award in Italy. His work has been adapted for screens both big and small. The Bone Collector, anyone? And in May, he released The Goodbye Man, the second book in his series featuring itinerant reward seeker Coulter Shaw. It got starred reviews from Booklist and Publishers Weekly, the latter of which noted, Deaver balances suspense and plausibility perfectly. Jeffrey's newest, Buried, is one of 6 shorts featured in the Amazon Original Stories collection Hush, available digitally and on audio July 30th. Here's the elevator pitch. After a long run as a respected journalist, Edward Fitzhugh is on his way out when he stumbles across the story of a lifetime. The gravedigger is a serial kidnapper who taunts the police with riddles. The other puzzle is his motive, which Fitz is determined to piece together. When an eyewitness to the latest abduction leads Fitz closer to the facts, he realizes that the last great story of his career is not at all what it appears to be. I know, that sounds very exciting, and it is, but hush now. Jeffery Deaver's got a few things to share with you.
Morning, Jeffery Deaver. I'm quite happy to be in your company today. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, John. Good to talk to you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you being here. And so you have a new short story out called Buried in Amazon Original, their collection called Hush. And this is the cover. I believe the book is going to be available digitally and also on audio. So it's a collection of 6 short stories from some of today's top crime writers. And obviously, you were very well known in this realm. And I did want to ask you, the concept sort of behind this collection seems to be the nature of truth, and trying to get to the truth, especially in this age where we're sort of all hit over the head with digital media and content. And you actually have a background in journalism that you're able to bring to your work. So can you talk about how that concept or that idea inspired your story, Buried?
Sure. I am known for being a sick and twisted person when it comes to my writing. Of course, your viewers may be familiar with The Bone Collector, for instance, which is typical of the genre that I'm comfortable writing in. But I feel that it's important for the storyteller to expand the tale a bit to give it resonance. So my novels and my short stories all have the core crime. And in the case of Buried, it's about a serial kidnapper who buries the victims. They're alive, but they have an opportunity to live. They have like an hour or 2 hours left to live. If the police can solve the riddle or the clue that he or she has left behind. And it's typical of my stories. It's very fast paced. The story takes place over like a day or two, lots of twists and turns and so forth. But the thing about crime fiction is that the conventions require us to write about a little bit more. So there has to be maybe a romance story involved, and that gives it some more emotional resonance. I also think that we need to look at certain social and geopolitical issues. For instance, in my novel, The Empty Chair, we looked at the toxic dumping and pesticides that the EPA maybe was turning its back on. And that gave a little more resonance to the story. Well, in Buried, I wanted it to step off the core crime a little bit, that is, have the story step out of that, and to be a look at the nature of media and journalism today, and that huge continuum from my homepage, the New York Times or the Guardian or the Washington Post on one end, which is journalism by attribution and multiple sources and pounding the pavement and now pounding the computer and the telephone, all the way to the InfoWars and even beyond that, clearly made up information that is presented as fact. And sorry, that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I like the fact that you can join a very fast-paced, edge of the seat crime story with broader topics, so that when somebody finishes Buried, I want them to think about, is that media source that I was just looking at? I hadn't heard about it before, but it's pretty good. And those reporters, it's digital, but those reporters do the traditional reporting. And so I just wanted my readers to not only have an exciting time, but also a little something to think about.
Sure, that's great. I'm going to ask you another question to sort of expand on that in a second, but I also just wanted to, make a quick side note that I think you just, spoke very eloquently to the fact that so many people writing in crime fiction bring in realities that are touching us, socially, economically, medically, perhaps. And it makes me think that, oftentimes crime fiction has been sort of dismissed as genre fiction. But when you think about it, I think crime fiction actually tends to be a lot more topical and resonant than other fictions, because it tends oftentimes to be the motivation for the crimes that we're seeing and the
Sure.
characters who are perpetrating them.
And if I could add to that, John, the thing about crime fiction is the reason I write that rather than fantasy, which I read a lot when I was growing up, and science fiction, which I also loved. I'm not going to get into literary fiction because I like to read it, but I don't have much talent for that. But the thing is that crime writers create their books according to a very specific formula that is geared toward giving the reader the most engaging experience they can have. I'm an outliner. I spend 8 months outlining a book before I write it. And every single minute of that outlining is geared toward my thought that I have to craft a very sleek vessel for my readers. It has to move very quickly. There can be no superfluous passages, no digression. I limit the amount of violence in the books because people find that unpleasant. And there can be nothing self-indulgent, or there should be nothing self-indulgent about crime writing. Of course, we come across those books occasionally, but crime allows us to, craft that perfect story for the readers. And I've often done panels on the is it genre or is it literature? Is it art or is it a sellout often? And I simply say, what was Shakespeare? What was Shakespeare originally? It was popular fiction. And frankly, I think Hamlet is simply Reservoir Dogs with the men wearing tights. I mean, there's absolutely no difference. There's duplicity, there's betrayal, there's ultra violence, and then everybody dies at the end. And that was popular back in Shakespeare's days. And Reservoir Dogs, and a film, of course, but you can extrapolate that to novels as well.
Sure, and it's funny, I just asked myself, well, did you enjoy it? Did you get something out of it? Then in my mind, that makes it a worthwhile read, regardless of, what we call it. And I did want to get back to Buried quickly, because you set up a really great dynamic. You have sort of two journalists featured pretty prominently throughout the story. One is Edward Fitzhugh, or everybody calls him Fitz, and he's sort of, the old school journalist. He's about ready to retire, and he really believes in pounding the pavement in the traditional way, knocking on doors, things of that nature. And then on the other hand, you have, young Dottie, who works in original online media content, and she's got the multiple earrings and the tattoos, and she's sort of had some success with, writing about animal videos that have gone viral. And so they sort of seem very opposite, and so they have assumptions about one another that are tested as the story unfolds. But the dynamic is really between old and new, and are they divided or can they unite in some way? So can you talk a little bit about those characters and the challenges that they face in seeing each other for who they are versus who they appear to be?
Sure. And first, I'll preface this because I suspect you have some viewers who might be aspiring authors, and I get that quite a bit when I do my interviews. And I've written 44 novels, probably 80 or 90 short stories. And one always thinks one knows what one's doing. But then occasionally, even later in one's career, you come across something that makes you reassess a bit. And a few years ago, I think it was on NPR, I heard a story by a neurolinguist, I believe it was, or maybe a psychologist, who said that the part of our brains that create emotional connection with our family and our friends, and also with our enemies, the people we're not necessarily enemies, but our antagonists, the boss we don't like, or the next door neighbor who's a bit difficult. The part of the brain that creates these emotional connections there is exactly the same as creates emotional connections with fictional characters. And I should have been thinking about this all my life, because I've been a very plot-driven author. I have multiple plots, they weave in and out, they can be very pyrotechnic. Not to say that I've neglected my characters, but I've tended to put a little less emphasis on them. Well, about 2, maybe 3 years ago, I started changing that. So for instance, in my novels, I created the character Coulter Shaw, who's a professional reward seeker, and he travels around the country kind of like an itinerant private eye. And I put a lot more character into him. And the response has been, oh, I like this guy. And so the books and stories have been, kind of validated for the character development. Now, when it came to writing Buried, I thought I need to create 2 rock solid, but very disparate, very different kind of characters that I wanted my readers to fall in love with. And yet, like all characters in fiction, they have to be flawed as well as be protagonists. But I thought, what a perfect opportunity here. The metaphor for journalism now, look at all the print newspapers going out of business, being replaced by digital media, some legitimate and some not. And then an old reporter, probably late 60s, I don't really give him an age exactly. And then here's young cyberpunk Dottie, who's inked and she's tatted and she's got multiple earrings, and she's hard on the case of doing a knockdown, drag out puff piece about an influencer. Because, an 18-year-old girl who says, what makeup are we going to wear today? And what's the outfit of the day going to be? And she kind of senses that there's more to it than there should be. There's more to this career of journalism. And she's a trained journalist. She went to J school, she's competent, but this is the job she got. And you mentioned the original online media content, and the way Fitz thinks about that, the old-time reporter, knowing what Dottie does, he kind of sneers and thinks that's something out of a Dr. Seuss book, UMEC, original online media content. That's just nonsense. But because of developments in the story where tracking down this serial kidnapper, there is a little more to it than meets the eye, and he can't do it by pavement pounding alone. He needs someone with her connections and her savvy on the digital world, and not just the media content that one would see online, but how does one get into the grit of the digital research and using the algorithms and the databases and he has no clue what this is. I mean, he still has something called a typewriter. Can you imagine that in his office? And so he does, transcribe his stories onto a computer at some point. But basically, he would love to go back to the old Underwood. And the pairing between them and the slow layering coming together is one of the main, I think, draws of the story. And it's a short story, but I tend to write fairly long short stories. I think it's maybe 15,000 words. So that's, I've written 3,000 word short stories too, but this is one where I needed the length to bring in the multiple plots. But part of that was to get them to kind of look across the glass divide in each other's office and think, there's something to be said for what she does.
Sure. And it's a point well taken, because at the same point, whether or not we love and embrace technology, we're in a time where we sort of need to in order to stay connected. And so here we are, having a virtual meeting via Zoom. And a couple of years ago, we probably wouldn't think that would be, how we were spending our time. So there's the good and the bad of it, I think. But I also, to follow up on that, I think, Fitz sort of coined the term pounding the digital pavement at one point in the story because he actually had to do, a little bit of computer work, and he realized, oh yeah, there really is some value to this. And I thought that was great to show a little bit of acknowledgement and respect for what Dottie had been doing and what he didn't really understand. But I also wanted to ask you a little bit more about the serial kidnapper. He's known as the grave digger throughout the story. And as we see, a lot of times in, true crime cases and also, books or other media, he sort of, he plays a little bit with the media, with the authorities, even with civilians, and he leaves behind clues in the form of limericks. So can you talk a little bit about that dynamic to the story, because it definitely adds a fun puzzle element to the piece.
Sure. I used to be a long time ago a poet. I guess one is always a poet. It's like a lawyer. I used to be a lawyer. I guess I'm still technically a lawyer. I wanted to be and I'm a published poet. I published in some obscure literary magazines many years ago. But I have always loved the way words sound, the way they go together, as much as what they mean. And in fact, when I have finished a novel or Buried, for instance, I have a program on my computer called Natural Reader, and I think there's a function in word processing program too, but a voice reads back your story to you. I just got Natural Reader because you can buy a premium version of it. It's only $10, $20, but you can kind of pick the voice, and it's very good. The software is very good. So whenever I finished anything, I put that on with a printed manuscript in front of me, and I listen to the story, and I make a lot of changes. I catch typos, of course, but I make a lot of changes based on the way the words sound. They don't sound right together. Maybe too many alliterations, or maybe this word just doesn't. It lands dully, and so I'll change that. Well, but whenever I write some kind of murder mystery, crime thriller, if there's any way I can work in a poem or something a little poetic, like my book XO, about a stalker of a country western singer. I wrote an album of country western songs that actually was published, and it gave me the chance to bring that love of word play. I shouldn't say word play, word sound, in addition to the love of word play, meaning what the words mean. So I thought, I've never heard of a limerick killer before. It just sounds like it'd be great fun. So I had the chance to put those skills together, and the clues are there. I mean, if the reader of Buried wants to, they could figure out where the victim is going to be held. But I'll tell you, they were a lot of fun. But word for word, that was the most difficult part of the book. And I would go, there once was a sailor from Nice. No, I don't want to go there. There's got to be other things I can do. So.
Yeah, no, it's just a lot of fun to read, and it's a clever take on the criminal playing with everybody. But I found that to be a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, and and sort of the other puzzle to the piece, and I don't want to get into this too much, but is the idea of, okay, we have this serial kidnapper, we think, but maybe he wants people, to find these victims, maybe not. And so the puzzle also becomes, what is the motivation for these crimes? Is it publicity? Is it something else? And I'm just wondering, can you talk a little bit about where the title for this story came from and sort of the multiple meanings that are implied in that one word, Buried?
Sure. I love my titles. I mean, they either come very quickly and are perfect, which happens 5% of the time, or I have to wrest them out of stone. It's like carving them out of a big block of granite. But if there's any way, I like the title to do double duty, to have multiple layers of meanings. And the first meaning is very obvious. It's that this killer, or not necessarily a killer, the serial kidnapper, buries his victims, and he finds a place underground, and they have some oxygen. They'll live for a while, and that's on the head, we would say. Well, there's another meaning, and that is, and it's a journalistic term of art, but it is very obvious, and I'm sure most of your viewers will know it, and that's when a news story is buried. And a perfect example of that is, speaking of truth in journalism, a newspaper will report a false story, either intentionally, as sometimes happens with the media that's not very reputable, or by mistake, and mistakes do happen, and that's a front page story. It might be above the fold, and this is a reference back to the days of paper newspapers, when you folded the newspaper over like this, and the banner headline was above the fold. Stories above the fold were more important than those below the fold. So say there's an inaccurate story above the fold, and it's very embarrassing to the newspaper, it might be very embarrassing to the person it's written about. They complain, well, there's a retraction. Where's the retraction? Often it's buried. It's on page 26 underneath the home and living section about how are your daffodils going to do this season. And there's the, oh, we're sorry, mea culpa, we got this completely wrong, and may have ruined somebody's life. So that's another meaning. And the fact is, I like the idea that within, it's a little subtle now, Dottie had buried her journalistic aspirations to sell out to this big online media company. And Fitz had buried his willingness to accept that maybe it's a new world right now. So, and that is a title that, it was that 5% title. It just bang came to me even as I was outlining the short story.
Sometimes you just know, but yeah, I mean, it perfectly, fits the story on so many levels. So I did have to ask you about that, because sometimes people say, well, oh, it's so obvious, but there are deeper, more subtle meanings to it. I'm glad there were, and I wasn't just misreading.
Yeah, it could have been, oh, did they put the title buried on it, John? I didn't even know that.
I know, right? What? My story? I didn't know it. So let me ask you this, if you don't mind. So in this story, you have an investigative reporter who really is a sleuth. And I think that a lot of times in crime fiction, and this doesn't necessarily always apply to your crime fiction, because you have people who have viable reasons to be involved in crimes, whereas a lot of times people have to create amateur sleuths and give them believable motivation. And I've always enjoyed reporter characters because I like that innate curiosity and the doggedness to them, but also they share many of the same traits as an investigator, a cop would. So do you find that makes it a little bit easier to bring believability to a story like this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I went to the University of Missouri Journalism School, and I graduated with a degree in journalism, but I was in the magazine track. I was never an investigative reporter. I like human interest stories, longer pieces. And but I respect, I studied investigative reporting. I learned how to do it. And it's very similar to police procedure. And in fact, it was not unusual now to see a reporter, especially covering true crime, maybe doing DNA analysis, him or herself, because there are private labs that do that, finding evidence. And I think what's shared between journalists and reporters is, I think you alluded to it before, a curiosity, and also a sense of something's wrong here, and I'm not going to let the wrongdoer get away with it. And that's probably the other reason that I would not have been a very good investigative reporter, because I'd go to this didn't happen, but I'm imagining this. I'd go to somebody and say, that there was a hit and run accident, and I've learned that a witness said your car was the one involved in this. And this guy would start to cry, and I'd say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you, and I'd walk away. But a true reporter would just bear down on him. And if you listen to some of the press conferences nowadays we don't need to get into politics, but at a press conference, some of these reporters are relentless in their pursuit of questions, as they should be, because what's the goal? To get to the truth. And sometimes you simply have to do what a cop would do, and push and push and push. I saw All the President's Men again, which is just superb, of course. I thought these are cops and spies, because you throw it in meeting in the parking garage late at night. Were there bad guys around who were going to hurt the two reporters? Well, yeah, probably there were. And of course, look at Russia. Russia has now become, for the purposes of crime writing and spy writing, is returned to what Russia and the Soviet Union once was. I mean, look at the poisonings in England, and I have no doubt that Russian operatives here, we know they're involved in cyber espionage and cyber sabotage, but they do dirty tricks too. And reporters in Russia have been targeted and killed, and
Right.
any threat against a reporter exercising the First Amendment right is just inexcusable.
Right, and yet so relevant in the world that we're living in.
It's quite relevant here and now. Yes, John, it is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sad, but we really are living in a world of, fake news and alternative facts. And who are those people who are willing to get the truth, and what is the price of that? But I think actually, that's an interesting reflection to have when considering this story that you wrote. But I do want to ask you as well, if you don't mind, a little bit about the differences between writing a full-length novel, which you've written, about 40 of, probably more, and a short story, which you've written many, many of as well. Because a lot of people that I talk to, say that they actually find the shorter form a bit more difficult because you have to accomplish, so much in a shorter period of space. And then there are the people on the other hand who say, it's quick, it's down and dirty, I prefer it, it's a one and done. How do you feel about that, having written so many of both?
Sure. I'm sure one of your viewers is going to correct the source of this quote, but I think it was, and it's paraphrased, but Abraham Lincoln comes to mind, but it could very well have been someone else who had sent a letter, maybe to a general, maybe to somebody else, or it could be completely in a different context. But the point of it was, it was a long letter, and he said, I didn't have time to make it short because condensing requires much effort. Well, for me, in general, the short story exists primarily for the twist. Now, all of my books have big twists and surprises in them. I usually have 3 surprise endings. Each subplot has a surprise ending. Each main plot has a reversal, then a surprise. Why? Because readers love that. I mean, I love it. I want to be surprised and twisted. In a short story, I have always have a twist. That it has to have a twist. It's not atmospheric. A short story exists for the twist. If I'm writing a longer short story, and by longer I mean 10,000 words or more, and I've done a fair number of those, and mostly for the Amazon Original Shorts, this series, I've done several. I think 3 or 4 or 5 for them. Those are longer short stories. So they skew a little toward the novel model. And by the novel model, I mean this. The typical Deaver prototype is it takes place over just a few days. It has multiple subplots. It might be that romance. It might be the geopolitical issue. It has the core crime. And those are all in some way interrelated. And it has a lot of character development. Now, especially after that revelation I had a few years ago, I'm paying more attention to my characters. The short stories I do for Amazon, because they're longer, they kind of adhere to that model. Now, the many more short stories exist for me only for the twist. And we don't have to care about characters. That should be an OMG, he got me at the end of that story. And I'll give you a very fast example of what I mean by that, where we don't need to like any of the characters. So here's a young girl. We focus on a young girl. I think she's probably in early high school, maybe middle high school. And she's got a stalker. A young boy at school is obsessed with her, and he sits outside the house on the sidewalk where it's legal, and stares at the house. The police come, he walks away. He's never hurt her, but he's obsessed with her. And as a result, her father, who's very protective, says, no, you can't go to the prom. He could be there. No, you can't go to the mall and hang out with your friends. This could be a danger. And she's very sad about that, of course, but she understands it. And then one day she goes to her father and says, he broke into my bedroom. He looked in my drawers. And the father gets incensed and he storms out of the house. Next thing we know, the stalker has been beaten to death. And the father's golf club is found near there. And he goes to jail and he's convicted of murder. But, you know, he's kind of a hero because he saved his daughter from this terrible stalker. Well, we cut to the final scene in the book where the girl is now getting dressed up in her prom dress, and she's got the little flowers on her dress. And her mother comes to the door and says, honey, your golf instructor called and says, do you want another lesson on Monday? And she says, no, that's okay, Mom. I've learned everything I need to know about golf at this point. And so she's the one who had killed the boy and blamed her father because her father wouldn't let her go to the prom. Now, we don't really like anybody in that story, but, you know, are you going to give a little chuckle when you get to the end? So that's the approach I take to a shorter short story. But now I will say this, and I think this is helpful, I think for your viewers who may want to do some writing. I am a firm believer in you have to know where you're going. I'm an outliner. You know the two phrases, pantser and plotter. Pantser is the seat of the pants. You simply sit down and start to write. And writers in all genres have created wonderful, wonderful pieces of work that way. I think George R.R. Martin doesn't outline Game of Thrones. He just kind of lets it go where it's going to go. And obviously, look at his success. But I'm not comfortable doing that. I have to plan everything out. I think Joyce Carol Oates said, paraphrasing again, you can't write your first sentence until you know what your last sentence is. And I'm just comfortable doing that. So I outlined the books and the short stories. Buried it's I don't know how many pages. Let's say 70 pages, 75 pages. The outline was probably 12 to 15 pages, and that had every single element of the plot in it, where the clues were revealed and where they were dropped in. And you know, it's a very important thing to do. You know, you're inclined not to, but you've got to do the organization somewhere at some point, because these stories or the novels are about it's like a symphony. It's about gauging the emotional response. It's about pacing. It's about timing and structure. And some people can do that on the fly. I find if I try to do that, I waste a lot of time. I have to go back and redo things. So just do the blueprint up front. You know, you don't get into a car that hasn't been built according to a blueprint. Why get into a book that hasn't been built, that is written according to a blueprint?
Sure. And, you know, I have to say quickly, this conversation is taking me back because with the exception of the Bone Collector movie, which I'll probably come back to in a second, you know, my first Jeffery Deaver reading experience was Twisted. And then was it more Twisted? But it's just funny to see this conversation sort of come full circle, because I loved that book, and I loved that you could get one over on me, because I sort of pride myself in being able to figure out what's going to happen, and time again, it's like he did it again.
I do try. Well, I mean, in Buried, for instance, it's well, of course we can't go anywhere near there, but there's a couple big twists, but at the end, just major twist. And it's I would like to think that when I start to get the feedback, readers are very, very smart. You know, they're gonna figure something out. But that's why I like to put in a couple twists, so at least I'll get them with one hook, if not the other. But I think in Buried, the readers are going to find, yep, that's quite a twist.
Oh, so true. It made me want to pull out the older books again, just to see how you do it. Do you find, I don't know, does it change over time, the difficulty in trying to trick people after you've done it so many times and people think that they're catching on to your game? Do you find that has any effect on you, or is it simply, for you, the same approach?
It's pretty much the same approach, although I just did an interview in England. Of course, book tours are virtual now, which is a sad thing, because I love meeting fans. I love talking about the books in person. But the one of the questions, it was on Twitter. I guess a Twitter, I'm not too familiar with that, but they set me up so I could answer Twitter questions in real time. And one of the questions came up that the twists, how do you come up with the twist? And are you worried that you're going to run out of twist ideas? And I said, well, at one point I'm going to write a book in which there are no twists, and that in itself is going to be a twist.
The ultimate.
Yeah. Well, no, I consider myself an illusionist, David Blaine or David Copperfield or Houdini. And they use the same techniques, sleight of hand and misdirection and so forth, disguise. And it's there. The problem I sometimes run into is that I'll outline an idea and say, oh, book number 28. I did that in book number 28.
Sure.
But if I'm lucky, the readers will have moved on and read other books in between the time they read that and a new book. But it's a challenge, and I wake up every morning. I write every day. I'm writing 2 books, 2 short stories, and editing a collection. I work a lot. Every morning I wake up and I'm afraid. I really am scared that I'm going to stumble. I'm going to come up with a clunker of an idea, or I'll in some way offend readers. I don't mean politically correct offend them, but offend them because I've created a twist that's too complicated, and they put the book or story down because they say, I just can't follow it, I'm not interested. Or it's too simple, and they say, oh, well, does he think I'm stupid? Obviously, that's what it's going to be. And, I get paid to make up stuff for a living. I owe everything to the readers, and I want to make sure that that they get what they pay for. It's literary capitalism at work. Let's put it right.
Well, it's funny that you had mentioned that, because I think we all sort of want the same but different as a reader. So you want the familiarity, but you want something fresh. And for somebody who's been in the game as long as you have, that must be a difficult thing, because ideas are endless, but as you said, they have to be credible, they have to be believable. You still want them to be original, and then that you have the built-in critic and readers across the world. But we have faith in you. You've well, no pressure, but you've done it time and again. But I did, just a couple more questions if you don't mind, but we alluded to the Bone Collector once or twice, and to, film and television a bit. And you've been very fortunate. You're, one of the authors who has been optioned, and you've actually seen, a couple of your stories come to life on the screen. So can you talk about that process and your relation to it, seeing something that you've created sort of envisioned by somebody else?
Sure. I've had The Bone Collector, both the movie and the TV series. I've had HBO did Dead Silence, starring James Garner, based on my book, A Maiden's Grave. Lifetime did, they did The Devil's Teardrop. So I've had those 4 things done. And actually, I worked on a Fox show that was not my creation. I was a writer, a producer on a Fox show, a reality show some years ago. So I've been involved to that extent. But I shouldn't say I've been involved. On the Fox show, I actually worked on the set a little bit, and it was fine. I had no bad experiences with it. I found it was less productive of my time than sitting by myself and writing. As far as the things that have been adapted of my work, I've been delighted they've been done. I've been pleased with all of them, but that's not my thing. I don't play well with others, and I like to sit in my room and be beholden only to myself. And I work with editors, of course, and I have to say the Amazon. I've worked with Amazon for other stories too, in addition to Amazon original shorts. And I've done an Audible original radio play, I guess you'd call it, and called The Starling Project on audible.com, which is part of the Amazon project. And I have to say the editing process has been as rigorous and as intelligent as any traditional publisher. Thomas and Mercer and the whole staff there, it is just bang up. And I want good editing. I need a hard, tough look at everything I write. And I've been very, very pleased with that. So I want that kind of partnership. But as far as the partnership that comes from the multi-talented crew at a film production company, you've got obviously the director, in addition to the writer, director, the sound editor, the Foley artist who makes footsteps sound like footsteps. There's the maybe the fight choreographer, the stunt people, the director of photography, everything, all of that. And it's all a joint communal creative effort. I don't see how movies get made. There's so much complexity, and yet it's something that I respect a great deal. I just don't have any talent for, frankly, or interest in. And I've written scripts. I've written a lot of scripts, and I've got a couple out now. There's a producer in England who might be doing it. I did it kind of as a lark, and we'll see what happens with that. Now production shut down because of the virus. I mean, a great writer, Don Westlake, that you may have read or may have known of, and he had a couple movies made of his books, and they were, let's say, less than felicitous. They were probably not the best interpretations of his very fine writing. And so he was just as we are now in a studio, although in a study, his own study, with a reporter, but live at that time. And the reporter said, "Mr. Westlake, what do you think about what Hollywood has done to your books?" And he was a very theatrical kind of guy himself. And he went like this. He said, "What? What to my books?" And he turned around and he looked at his bookshelf and he said, "Oh, you scared me. They haven't done anything to my books. There they are." And that's true. If a bad movie comes out of a good book, readers know the difference. They don't blame the author for that, and they're not going to stop reading them. And by the same token, it's happened the other way too, that there have been very good movies made out of books that were marginal or digressive or probably less than enjoyable. So I will say I cashed the check very quickly. We never know what happens in Hollywood. Go on to the process. It's been kind of chic to beat up Hollywood, especially if a movie has not been that great. And I've heard authors say, "Oh, they just took, they took my baby. They destroyed my vision." And then you kind of want to say, yeah. And when did you send the check back in protest?
Point well taken. It's very true. And I think if there's, a lesson to be taken from that, it's cash the check quickly, don't sit on it,
Exactly.
But also, the book still exists. And I know that I have found, in the times that I've been unsatisfied in an adaptation, that I've gone back to the book, and that sort of refreshed my good memories of the story. So it's actually nice to be able to have that to revisit if you want to. So another point well taken. So final question for you, because I know that you're quite busy. As you mentioned, you're writing 2 books at the moment, you're editing, you have this short story coming out very soon, and very recently you also had The Goodbye Man come out a couple of months ago. So I know that people who read Buried are going to want to read more Jeffery Deaver. I can tell you that, that book is already in my virtual cart after having finished the short story. So for people who haven't yet read that novel, can you just give a little teaser as to what they might expect from that, since that's your most recent full-length release?
Sure. The Goodbye Man is the second in a series featuring my character, Coulter Shaw. Now, Coulter Shaw is an itinerant reward seeker. He has a Winnebago. He travels around the country looking for rewards. Now, he doesn't really care about the money, and it's not really a surprise. We learn in the first book in the series, which came out last year, The Never Game, that he doesn't really care about the money. What he sees in a reward is a challenge, because if a reward exists, by definition, that's a problem that somebody has not been able to solve. A crime that has the police have not been able to track down the killer or whoever. They haven't been able to track him down. An escaped fugitive, the police can't find him, or a missing person that the police are not really interested in tracking down, like a high school student goes missing, but the kid may have a history of running away, but the parents think this time's different, and so they offer reward, and nobody else can solve it. So Coulter Shaw gets on the case because he's got a restless body and a restless mind. He has to travel, and he has to have challenges. The Never Game was about a murder in Silicon Valley, series of murders where a young person, we think, but maybe that's not what really happened, is acting out a video game like Doom or Assassin's Creed in real life. And Coulter Shaw has to solve that. In the Goodbye Man, which starts 8 hours after the Never Game ended, Coulter Shaw goes to Washington State after two apparent neo-Nazis, white supremacists, have shot up a church and injured, African-American church, and injured some people. And he goes to track them down. But as we were talking earlier, in all of my books, there are a lot of right turns and a lot of changes in the plot. And suddenly it turns out that there's a little more to this that's going on. And he ends up in what appears to be a cult. That's not OCCULT, a new word, cult, the Osiris Foundation. That may be a self-help group, but if you're reading a Jeffery Deaver book, you know it's not really a self-help group, and all hell ensues from there. I should add that I am not one of the two books I'm working on now is the sequel to The Goodbye Man, which opens 13 hours after The Goodbye Man ends. And that's what I'm calling, it's a trilogy. It's called the Echo Ridge Trilogy. For anyone who has read any of those books will know. And then Coulter Shaw will continue to return, traveling around the country to find his rewards. But this is a trilogy really to kick him off and get him going. And so it's great fun. And actually, the book's just about done. But I'm also writing a new Lincoln Rhyme book at the same time. That'll be published next year.
Lots to look forward to, which is great, especially while we're stuck at home. So lots of good reading to do. Jeffery Deaver, you have blown my mind, as I suspected you would do after reading you for so many years. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to be here this morning. And for people, a quick reminder, the story is Buried, and it is in the Amazon original collection Hush, which is coming out on July 30th. I highly encourage you to check it out. Thank you so much, Jeffery.
Oh, John, a pleasure talking to you.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.